Cloud computing threats, again, could include data breach and loss. Data loss issues include that data is erased, modified, or decoupled. Encryption keys are lost, misplaced, or stolen. Illegal access to the data in the cloud due to improper authentication, authorization, and access controls on the part of the cloud provider. And misuse of data by a cloud service provider. In the next column, we have abuse and nefarious use of cloud services. Attackers create anonymous access to cloud services and perpetrate attacks such as password and key cracking, building rainbow tables, CAPTCHA solving farms, launching dynamic attack points, hosting exploits on cloud platforms, hosting malicious data, botnet command and control, and DDoS. On the right, we see insecure interfaces and APIs. Related risks to these due to the insecure interfaces and APIs include circumvention of user-defined policies, credentials leakage, breach and logging and monitoring facilities, dependency on unknown APIs, reuse of passwords and tokens, and poor input data validation. Continuing with cloud computing threats, we have insufficient due diligence. Ignorance of the CSP's, cloud service provider's cloud environment, poses a risk to operational responsibilities such as security, encryption, incident response, and other issues such as contractual issues, design, and architectural issues. There's also shared technology issues. Most underlying components that make up the cloud infrastructure, for example, the GPU and CPU caches, do not offer strong isolation properties in a multi-tenant environment, which allows attackers to attack other machines if they could exploit the vulnerabilities in a single client's applications. Unknown risk profile. Cloud organizations are unable to get a clear picture of the internal security procedures, security compliance, configuration hardening, patching, auditing, and logging, and so on, as they are less involved with hardware and software ownership and maintenance in the cloud. Next, we have unsynchronized system clocks. These could affect the working of automated tasks. The network administrator cannot accurately analyze log files for any malicious activity if the timestamps are in fact mismatched. Threats continue to include inadequate infrastructure design and planning. A shortage of computing resources and or poor network design can result in an unacceptable network latency or an inability to meet agreed service levels. This is especially the case if the cloud service provider is suddenly and unexpectedly tasked with a severe overload in traffic and clients and are unable to keep up with the increase effectively. Then with loss of operational security logs, the loss of security logs poses a risk for managing the implementation of the information security management program. Loss of security logs may occur in cases of under-provisioning of storage. Again, that can take place if storage demands are rapidly escalated beyond the capacity of the provider to keep up with them. There's conflicts between client hardening procedures in the cloud environment. Certain client hardening procedures may conflict with the cloud provider's environment, making their implementation by the client impossible. And we have malicious insiders. Disgruntled current or former employees, contractors, or other business partners who have authorized access to cloud resources can misuse their access to compromise the information available in the cloud, and also laterally also compromise the information of other tenants in that same cloud. Again, with threats continuing, we have illegal access to the cloud. Weak authentication and authorization controls could lead to illegal access, thereby compromising confidential and critical data stored in the cloud. Loss of business reputation due to co-tenant activities, again, can impinge upon your business reputation. Resources are shared in the cloud, thus malicious activity by one co-tenant might affect the reputation of the other, resulting in poor service delivery, data loss, etc., that can be detrimental to an organization's well-being. We have in the cloud, as we do in non-cloud environments, always the ever-present danger of privilege escalation. A mistake in the access allocation system can result in a customer, third party, or employee getting more access rights than are needed or they should have. Again, we have the threat of natural disasters depending on geographic location and climate. Data centers may be exposed to natural disasters such as floods, lightning, earthquakes, etc., that can affect the cloud services. Caveat to this, once again, of course, your own on-site in-house physical infrastructure is equally perhaps exposed to natural disasters. So it may not be a fair criticism this to a cloud service provider unless they happen to put their facilities, again, the physical location of their equipment on a very obvious possible natural disaster, such as an retake, such as, for example, an earthquake fault line. Then we have issues with hardware failure such as switches and servers in data centers can make the cloud data inaccessible not just to one, but to multiple tenants. Threats continued. We have supply chain failures. Cloud providers outsource certain tasks to third parties. Thus, the security of the cloud is directly proportional to the security of each link and the extent of dependency on third parties. A disruption in this chain may therefore lead to a loss of data privacy and integrity, as well as services for vulnerability, a violation of the SLA, and economic and reputational losses, which in turn results in the failure to meet customer demands and cascading. A good abstract scenario to look at in this case would be to imagine that you become a subscriber to a cloud service. Initially, the cloud service provides you just with data storage, but then you also contract them for security of the service and contract to them all your security needs over your infrastructure. Subsequently, suppose that that cloud service provider contracts yet another cloud service provider to provide it with its security needs, which now, of course, would include the security needs of multiple tenants. We could iterate these levels of security to the level where the subsequent iterated cloud service provider security as a service may become so diluted as to be extremely unstable and insecure. Moving on, modifying network traffic. In the cloud, the network traffic may be modified due to the flaws while provisioning or deprovisioning the network, or vulnerabilities in communication encryption. Modification of network traffic may cause loss, alteration, and theft of confidential data and communications. And as we have seen on several points on this retake, and as we have seen or noticed at several points in this module, isolation failure is a prominent threat. Following isolation failure, attackers may try to control operations of other cloud customers to gain illegal access to the data. Threats continue to include cloud provider acquisition. The acquisition of the cloud provider may increase the probability of a tactical shift, which may put non-binding agreements at risk. This could make it difficult to satisfy the security requirements. Once again, it's an open question at this point, to the best of my knowledge, in the fact that if your cloud service provider is absorbed and bought out by another cloud service provider, to what extent are they obligated to ensure and conform to your contract with the initial cloud service provider, who is no longer, again, a player in this. There is network management failure. Poor network management leads to network congestion, misconnection, misconfiguration, lack of resource isolation, etc., which affects service and security. We have management interface compromise also as a threat. Customer management interfaces of cloud providers are accessible via the internet and facilitate access to many resources. This enhances the risk, particularly when combined with remote access and web browser vulnerabilities. And we have authentication attacks. Weak authentication mechanisms, such as weak passwords or reuse of passwords and so forth, and the inherent limitations of one-factor authentication mechanisms can allow an attacker to gain unauthorized access to cloud computing systems. Other threats include VM-level attacks. The cloud extensively uses virtualization technology. This threat arises due to the existence of vulnerabilities in the hypervisor itself, or the hypervisors themselves. We have, again, lock-in vulnerability. The difficulties experienced by a user when migrating from in-house systems or from one cloud service provider to another due to the lack of tools, procedures, or standard data formats poses potential threats to data applications and service portability. So you may not have a seamless integration or transition of your data to the cloud service provider, in that inefficient, interrupted, or incomplete transfer of data, you could end up losing the data and or having the data exfiltrated and stolen or compromised. There are licensing risks. The organization may incur a huge licensing fee if the software deployed in the cloud is charged on a per instance basis. Again, similar considerations apply to issues with perhaps copyright or trademark or patent infringement of IP that is on the cloud service provider's facilities. Loss of governance. When using cloud infrastructure, the customer gives up control to the cloud service provider, including control issues that may affect security. Loss of encryption keys is perhaps the most sinister issue here. The loss of encryption keys required for secure communication or systems access provide a potential attacker with the opportunity to get unauthorized access to various assets on the cloud. Again, the soft underbelly of encryption continues to be the provisioning, distribution, and safeguarding of those encryption keys. And again, the question is, if those encryption keys have been safeguarded and put into the control of your cloud service provider, but they fail to safeguard them, to what extent are they vulnerable or liable for any damages that result from that? Other threats continue to include risks from changes of jurisdiction. A change in the jurisdiction of data can lead to the risk that the data or information system may be blocked or impounded by a government or other organization. Case in point, suppose your cloud service provider migrates their physical facilities now to another facility in Germany. And you have data on there, which includes massive amounts of data on consumers that you've collected. The EU's, the European Union's, regulations and laws regarding data privacy are much more stringent than the US. Therefore, if your cloud service provider were to move its operations to Germany, for example, with your data on there that you have now, according to their laws, illegally accumulated on consumers without their consent, these could have severe and lasting legal repercussions to you. Undertaking malicious probes and scans. Malicious probes or scanning allows an attacker to collect sensitive information that may lead to a loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of services and data. And of course, as always, we have the actual theft of computer equipment. Though this is rare, it is still a threat. Poor controls over the physical parameters, such as smart card access to the point of entry, may lead to the loss of physical equipment and sensitive data. This, in fact, has occurred where actual servers, printers, and computers have physically been stolen from a cloud provider's site. Cloud service termination or failure. This is an especially great concern. The termination of a cloud service due to non-profitability or disputes might lead to a data loss unless end users are legally protected. In fact, even if they are legally protected, if the protection is not without damages, then there might not be much of a chance to collect anything due to such losses. Again, the nightmare scenario here is you have entrusted massive amounts of your data and sensitive information to a cloud provider, and they go bankrupt and just shut down, and essentially the provider's offices suddenly are totally empty. What happens to your data? Is it still stored? Can you get to it? These could be extremely worrisome scenarios. And we have, of course, subpoena and e-discovery. If a customer data or services are subpoenaed or subjected to a cease and desist request from authorities or third parties, access to such data and services may be compromised. Now, this could be even more egregious. For example, suppose you are contracting a cloud service provider, you are a tenant on their server, but that server has other tenants. One of them happens to be a market site for illegal drugs that are being basically sold on the dark net. The cloud service provider themselves may not know that this is taking place. However, suppose the DEA or FBI finds out that this is taking place. They could essentially seize that server, and it doesn't matter that your data is on there too. Your data has at the very least just become completely unreachable to you. What provisions are there for the cloud service provider to essentially prevent you from losing your data should their servers become inoperable because they are seized by the government due to a subpoena, search warrant, or court order? Improper data handling and disposal are also issues. If it is difficult to ascertain data handling and disposal procedures followed by CSPs, due to limited access to cloud infrastructure, such data may in fact be compromised without your knowledge. The loss, modification of backup data. Attackers might exploit vulnerabilities such as SQL injection, insecure user behavior like storing passwords and reusing passwords to gain illegal access to the data backups in the cloud. Once again, we circle back or revisit compliance risks. Organizations that seek to obtain compliance with standards and laws may be put at great risk if the CSP cannot provide evidence of their own compliance with necessary requirements, outsource cloud management to third parties, and or does not permit audit by the client. For example, suppose you are storing HIPAA information, which has very specific safeguards as to how it may or may not be stored. You have stored this on your cloud service provider server, believing that it is following HIPAA. For whatever reason, that is not the case. Now they're audited and found in serious violation of HIPAA. Are you too now in serious violation of HIPAA due to storing your HIPAA data on an improperly safeguarded server that is violating HIPAA regulations? And we have economic denial of sustainability, or EDOS. If an attacker engages the cloud with a malicious service or executes malicious code that consumes a lot of computational power and storage from the cloud server, then the legitimate account holder is charged for this kind of computation until the primary cause of CPU usage is detected. For example, suppose somebody on the cloud service provider's platform is in fact doing illegal or secret blockchain mining for Bitcoin. That kind of mining, of course, essentially uses up enormous amounts of computational power, and then the cloud service provider passes those costs on to you too, because you happen to be a tenant on the same site.